welcome to my session, which is Inside Story of Struggle. I think you just saw a video, and the video basically was a synopsis of our summer program with the students out of Boston. So, one of the things, the story of struggle, how I can best describe it is, a young male looking to get into film and television after losing a close friend to suicide. And I guess that kind of sent me to New York City and put me on this journey. And I didn't know that film was actually going to be sort of the catalyst to where I am now. I think it was more about just sort of leaving a space that felt comfortable and going somewhere else to create like a new life. I thought at 23, after losing a really close friend, that was sort of the end of, an era. I had lost 3 people to suicide prior to that, one at 10 years old, another one at 23, another one at 19. I lost another person at 25 and an uncle at 34. And I think I set out on this sort of quest, right? Like we all kind of go through these phases where we want to go somewhere and do something. And I think I wanted to create a story about struggle in the Black community around suicide because it happens so often. The first time, again, at 10 years old, which I didn't really understand until I got older. And then moving to New York, deciding to get into some sort of creative outlet to tell the story of what happened and how it happened. But because it was so frequent, it was hard to keep up with it because it was a new story each time, and sort of cliche for our culture to talk about suicide. So I kind of got into poetry and a lot of sort of artistic endeavors, and ran into people that worked in film and wanted to use that as my new medium, not realizing that I would become what I am now, which is a director of photography that basically tells the stories through light and through camera movement. And I was given that opportunity this year to really take off and do a show called Younger on TVLand, which was a lot more than just a show. I think it turned into something where I was able to look at my life in all these different facets and see the culmination of all the hard work, also the struggle, whether it be through race, whether it be through accessibility. And, I was able to basically take that opportunity and kind of springboard into other opportunities. One being, the founder and CEO of Bridgebuilder Cinematic Arts, where we teach high school kids how to tell films. What I learned in that process was there's a lot more to offer the world after having gone through this process, where some people want to jump from point A to point Z, in a nanosecond. I'm a much more meticulous person when it comes to details in my life, and I wanted to be able to tell the stories of our people as accurately as possible, not just through my eyes, but also through theirs. So with the opportunity of becoming a cinematographer, you're given a lot more quote unquote control over what you're doing, to a sense. I mean, you also have studios and directors and stuff that kind of get involved in that. But you have the ability to put your blueprint on the process, and you're able to do things with your cameras, your lenses, lights that to me now feel more like painting, which is kind of strange because I'm definitely not a painter, but I would consider myself a painter of light. But the analogy to that is being able to paint this picture of a community that with an empty canvas, and taking what most people would look at as broken, a community that is is say Southeast Baltimore or East St. Louis or the Bronx, South Bronx, Brooklyn, any place where there's poverty. Um, I feel like that's become my calling. I've grown up in neighborhoods and areas that have been right with, the gambit of, one side of the street you have people with money and the other side of the street you don't. I know what it's like to look in the fridge and see that, you have one egg and some ketchup and half a piece of bread, and being able to make something of that and still take care of yourself and be able to speak that language to people who are also struggling. I feel like that's the calling, and that's sort of the catalyst for becoming, a Hollywood cinematographer. Like, yeah, it sounds glamorous and it's great, but what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with your instruments and your voice and your ability to speak to people? And I feel that with this opportunity, I'm able to speak at a broader sense to more people and be put in arenas that we don't normally get put into. So to kind of Bridgebuilder itself is in fact that, it's a bridge between Hollywood and what Hollywood sort of talks about and wants to support, but doesn't necessarily know how, or is not really actively doing the things that need to be done to fix, systemic racism or sexism or homophobia or whatever those things might be. I think creating Bridgebuilder has sort of enlightened me and other people to the possibilities. So the videos that you saw were done by high school students who had never made a film before. They never knew they could make a film at a time during COVID where there's no interaction. They don't like being online. This was a completely online process that was done with them. And every video that you see or that you've seen, and videos on my website, which I'll put in the chat, those are all done by high school students. They were done virtually with instruction by 20 people from my organization who were volunteers during that process, and another organization called That Girl Got Talent, and another organization called All Aces. We kind of teamed up and created this online process for high school kids. And again, my point is that, coming from nothing and creating something to give back to the community, but also, to pay the bills and things like that. But the larger picture and the larger goal and story here is how you can go from nowhere with no instruction, no college education around film and filmmaking to 23 years in film and television with the gray hair to kind of match it. And if there's one thing that I can definitely tell you as a Black cinematographer, one of 30 in the country, what I've learned more than anything is more about leadership. It's not so much about the craft. I mean, we'll learn our craft until we stop doing it. It's more, how do you become a better leader? And that's something that I've learned, and I'm working on perfecting each day. I mean, I'm reading and listening to people on how you become more effective leader than a cinematographer. I mean, that, again, I think that's something that'll come with the background and also the continuous learning. Look at storytelling and the power of it. We all have a story to tell, and whether we're afraid to tell that story or not, sometimes we do it in nonfiction and fiction. But one of the main sort of things that I think about with telling stories is looking at things in terms of a pyramid, right? My mom used to say that the wider your pyramid base, the higher your peak. And I never really that didn't make sense to me until I got older. And then I started looking at storytelling techniques and how people tell stories. And I looked at, the hero's journey. And if you look at old Aristotle, things from thousands of years ago, the sort of pyramid idea of a story is something that's well and kind of woven into like the traditional and some of the sort of Shakespeare's and they've looked at storytelling in 5 parts. And if you look at a pyramid, base and its sides, they kind of look at how stories get told in 5 acts based on this sort of pyramid idea. And those things have been sort of tried and true for every storyteller and every master of storytelling, whether it be narrative storytelling, whether it be through books, poems, music, which is also a different form of storytelling. Each one of them have the same sort of base premise to them, and kind of work alongside that. If there are any questions, I would love to answer them. Laura, so as an exercise, and this is sort of more the interactive part, I guess, if you have a piece of paper, or can imagine if you have a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, kind of draw a pyramid, right? Draw a pyramid on an empty piece of paper, and then afterwards look at it after you've drawn it, and see how big that pyramid is. Does the pyramid take up the whole space? Is it a corner? Is it in the middle? And if you haven't done that, before I finish speaking, just sort of have people around you do that, and talk to them about the idea of, a pyramid being built mathematically. The higher the peak of it, if you look at it, is sort of, relative to the base of it. So the pyramid you draw is only going to be, as high as that base that you built. So if you think of your life and your stories to be rich, you think of how wide can my base be so that I can reach my highest peak. And I think that's something that I kind of have lived by, and been meticulous in not running too fast, and understanding that I'm just going to keep building my base. If you think of runners, you think of distance runners, and people, they build their base before they start everything else, before they get into the latter part of their seasons and things like that. So, if you think of storytelling, think of your personal stories, think of stories you want to tell, think of them in terms of pyramid bases, and the peak of that, even if it's something even deeper than that, which would be your characters. Your characters will be only as rich as you give them backstory, and that backstory is the base of that pyramid. So I would encourage everybody to kind of do the exercise and look at it from that standpoint. Your life, your relationships, your business, your work, your friendships, your interactions, so that they're not just transactional. Also things of, outside of storytelling. I think that it's very, very important. And it sounded so simple and complex at the same time. At the beginning, my mom told me that when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and it made no sense to me. I had no idea what she was talking about. But as I got older and I started to, was running, and people would talk about your base and building your base first, and your stamina and all that, then it came up again in terms of storytelling, and it came up again in terms of becoming a cinematographer, which is a lifelong thing, I think. And you look at martial artists, like the masters of it, they'll tell you that they will continue to work on their craft until they die. That means that they, I don't know if you peak when you die, but I think it's more about, understanding the power of building a strong foundation. If you think of the largest pyramids in the world being in Egypt, but if you look around and think of the pyramids that were built before that, those were like practice runs at this magnificent thing, which is why they're so big, and they're still, one of the wonders of the world, I think. They perfected those. There's pyramids everywhere, but they're smaller. And I think people, kind of forget that, and they look at the success as the peak. And however you define that, some people think about it in terms of money. And, some of the saddest and most angry and frustrated people are the ones with the most money. I think of it more as my community and rebuilding my community. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me. And thank you for showing up. Appreciate your time and energy.